What's up everyone, this is Andre from Indie Arts Midwest, and in this video I'm going to show you how to create a dust wave. Now, the assets that I have for this particular tutorial are just a simple HDRI for our background, a plane with a texture that came from HDR Haven, and I'm using a Bell 206 which I downloaded from Sketchfab, but feel free to use whatever assets you want. So we have our default scene here, and I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the cube and this light source. And now I'm going to add a plane and scale it up ×2. Turn on grid snap, go into front view, and Shift A and add a cylinder. Grab on the Z axis and pull it up to about here. Face mode. Select the top and bottom faces of the cylinder and delete. Back into front view and Control R. Go into vertex mode and select these bottom vertices here. Alt left click to loop select, and we're just going to scale these out. About here or so. Then I'm going to select the top vertices here and loop select and scale them inward. Then Control R to add a loop cut on this bottom section here. Scale that in a little bit. Select these vertices, scale those in, and essentially we're trying to create a cone shape, as you can see. One more loop cut. Scale that in. I'm going to select these top ones and scale them in so that it's a much sharper point at the top. Loop select the bottom vertices, Shift S, cursor to selected, and object set origin to 3D cursor. I just backed out for a moment and right click to select smooth, and I wanted more of a cone shape. So I jumped back into object mode and just scale things in a little bit more. At this point you can kind of set it up to a cone shape as you see fit. I just needed a little more out of that. So now we'll go back to front view. We'll scale it on the Z axis. For me, I just did 0.5. Rotate 180 degrees. Grab on the Z axis and pull it up. And there we have it. Now, as you can see, I can test the scaling from this point and it works extremely well. Looking at this, I'm going to add a few more loop cuts just to smooth things out. Looks a lot better now. And I'm just going to take a moment to jump into my camera and bring down the focal length to 35. You don't have to do this. It's just kind of helps me see what's going on in front of the camera a little bit better. Then I'm going to scale it down to 0.5, which seems to be a good scale for the overall scene because ultimately we want it to be smaller than the helicopter. And as you'll see later, shorter than the helicopter. So I'm just going to do a quick rotate test. This will give me an idea on how far left and or right I need it to lean, about -26.76 or so, somewhere in that range. We will jump over to the constraint tab. We want to select limit rotation. Control A to apply rotation. Check the X and Y. Min max, we're going to set -26 and 26 for both X and Y. Test that out. You can see it stops on either side here. And I think that looks great. Save our progress. And now I'm going to import our helicopter into the scene. There we go. Rotate it minus 90 degrees on the z-axis. So essentially its front is facing your right if you're looking at the screen, and the rear of the helicopter is facing your left. Now, keep in mind, this is just for setup purposes for this particular scene, but obviously when you get into setting up your own stuff, then, the helicopter rotation will be determined on what's going on in the scene. So first thing I'm going to do is this helicopter needs a little bit of editing. So I'm going to go into edit mode and separate the propeller section from the helicopter itself, because we'll be doing some stuff with that later. And P to separate selection. Select these bottom vertices here, Shift S cursor to selected, and object set origin to 3D cursor. Now, as you can see, it's parented to its original origin, so I'm just going to Alt P, clear parent, and keep transformation. And we have some extra parts of the helicopter here, so what we're going to do is just select the windows here and Control J to join them up with the body of our helicopter. Then select the propellers and Shift select our helicopter body, Control P to parent. And as you can see, the origin for the helicopter is still set from its import. So I'm just going to Alt P to clear parent and keep transformation. And we should be good to go now. I will also take a moment to name this object, which will be Bell 206. And it seems to be good, so we can go ahead and save our progress, and we are moving along. Next, I'm going to select the helicopter body and object set origin to geometry so that it's more centered. Now we're ready to animate. So I'm going to zoom out and we're going to pull it all the way back. If I were to count how far back we're looking at, it's about 8. And then we will press I to insert its location. I'm starting with 400, but as you'll see later, it jumps up to 5. So just go ahead and set it to 5 for now. Once I have that set, jump to the last frame. Just for a basic animation to get it started, we'll go ahead and pull it back to around its original location. I'm going to try and line this up a little bit here. Just go back just a hair. There we go. And I'm going to turn off grid snap so that I get a better position on the z-axis here. And if everything's looking good, as you can see, I'm going to go ahead and I to insert location, and we can play that back. So as I said before, super basic animation. One thing I will point out is that I chose not to change its interpolation to linear because I'm actually okay with it having a slow start and then a slow end. Now, depending on your animation setup, that might be a little different. So next thing we're going to do is look at how close it gets to the ground, because I do want to have that landing look that you see helicopters do where they tilt forward. So at about frame 300, we're going to tilt it upward. I to insert. And I think that looks all right. Now, obviously, feel free to tweak that if you have a lot more knowledge on how the landing animation is supposed to look. But for the purposes of this simple tutorial, I'm just going to stick with this. Now I'm going to select the camera and we're going to go into the Object Constraint tab and select the Track 2. And we will set it up for the Bell 206. Just take a look at that in the camera view, and yeah, I think that looks pretty good. Kind of weird without the blade spinning, but definitely looking the way I would like it to. we'll save our progress. So next we're going to focus on the cone. So we'll go ahead and select that. Take a look at it here. As you can see, it's pretty close to the bottom. So I'm just going to first scale it out, S, and then Shift Z so that it does not scale up on the Z axis. After I feel like it's wide enough, we will then scale it on the Z axis just to kind of flatten it a little bit. Now in doing that, I also altered its rotation from limit rotation. So now I'm just going to reset. And if we take a look here, it's about minus 8.55. So we're just going to change these values to minus 8 and 8. And that's for the X and Y. So be sure to lock those in depending on how big or small your cone is. And we'll save our progress. So now that we're good there, we can add another object constraint, which will be a damped track. We're going to select the Bell 206, which throws off that rotation there. So once we select Z, it's good to go. And I'm going to turn its influence way down to 0.1. And we'll just pull this up above our limit rotation here, which will give that priority over its movements. And if we just grab our chopper and move it around a little bit, as you can see, it follows it around just fine. So if we back up on the animation here, you can see it's got a bit of lean to it. So with that set, I'm going to go ahead and go back to the first frame, Shift S cursor to selected, and then we will Shift A to add a force field, which will be force, go figure. And I'm just going to bring this down on the Z axis just a little bit. Feel free to tweak these settings as you see fit once you get a pretty standard setup. So none of this is concrete, so just keep that in mind. For now, we're going to set the strength to 8. Flow we will set to 1. Scroll down here and set our max distance at about 20 to start, followed by Shift selecting the helicopter body and Control P to parent our force field to the body itself. Then select the force field, Shift S cursor to selected, then Shift A to add another force field, which will be turbulence. And we will also Control P to parent that to our helicopter body as well. And jump into our settings. We will set the strength to 10. And we will just jump down to the max distance, which we will set to 22. So it's just beyond the borders of the previous force field. And again, feel free to set that as you see fit. And we are playing this just to take a look at about where our max distance starts to interact with the cone. So we can then add a particle sim. So we'll just jump to that. And I'm going to start with about 5,000. For our frame start, we actually want to go a lot further than just one. We're going to go with 250 frames to 500. So yeah, 250 seems like a great starting point for this. As you can see, the combination of force and turbulence causes our particles to shift into one direction, and just as it centers above our cone, it spreads outward, and that's exactly the effect that we want. Next, we can focus on adding our volume. So we're going to Shift A and add a cube. I'm going to scale it up times 8, then times 4, and Control A to apply its scale. This is extremely important. Next, we'll jump into the Object tab, go over to Viewport Display, and instead of solid, we're going to select wire so we can actually see what's going on here. So now with Grid Snap, we're going to grab on the Z-axis and pull it up 2 notches below the X-axis line. And that's extremely important. We'll jump over to our Physics tab and select Fluid. We have it set as domain. I'm going to bump up the resolution to 64 for the purposes of this tutorial. Scroll down to buoyancy, and I will set this to 0.0001. And for the heat, we will set to 0.0001 as well. Select dissolve. For tutorial purposes, we will keep it at 5. You may want to bump this up to dissolve a lot slower later, depending on the size of the volume that you're trying to control. Down to our cache here and set it for our frame start at 250, and the end will remain at 5. Now we'll select our cone here. Go back to the Physics tab, select Fluid. For this part, we're going to want flow. For flow behavior, we want inflow. Then we'll go down to flow source. In this case, it would be our particle system, and we will also select the particle system that we're using here. If you've custom named yours, be sure to select that one. Let's just do a quick play, see what happens. And there we go. We got a nice particle-based volume. You can see it's pushing that smoke forward based on our particle simulation here. Now at this point, if you want to tweak your volume settings, feel free. It's also totally fine if you just want to follow this all the way through and then tweak your settings later. It's pretty much whatever you want to do, and it also depends on the circumstances of the project that you're working on. So I'm just going to zoom out and take a look at things. It's just a giant ball of volume. I'll just save our progress. Then I'm going to select the helicopter here, and we're just going to focus on that. Next, you'll want to shift duplicate the helicopter. Then we will Control P to parent. And if we take a look at our drop down here, we can see that it is within the list, and I will rename this to Bell 206 _ collision. I'm just going to go ahead and hide these two. Go into the Physics tab, select Fluid, and the type will be Effector. The collision stuff's already set, so we can just leave that alone here. Since we're on our first frame, we're just going to go ahead and test our animation, and this will just allow the smoke to travel around the helicopter body rather than through it. Now, it's not something that I added for the tutorial, but you could also add this effect for the chopper blades as well. So just keep that in mind that it is optional, but my main focus was for you all to see the helicopter. So it's kind of hard to tell because the volume is filling the scene, including the area with the camera. So this is why, as you'll see here shortly, I added the additional force field so that we could see what's going on. So more than likely your camera will be positioned differently and you won't have to deal with this. For now, I'm just going to go ahead and save our progress and we can move on. So as you can see, I'm selecting the chopper blades, Shift S cursor to selected, and then Shift A to add our third force field, which will be wind. You are not required to use it. It's just that I wanted to ensure that we could get a nice view of our helicopter as it's landing. I'm going to go into side view here and just rotate it 180 degrees. And I'm going to set it strength to 5. Though looking back, I kind of regret not setting it to something lower like 1. And finally, we will shift select the body and Control P to parent. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that's doing in the camera view here. As it comes up, hits frame 250. It suppresses a lot of that dust. So as you can see, it's not necessarily spreading upward so much, it's more outward. This part is completely optional, and if you do go with this route, I would recommend maybe turning it down a little bit so that you get a little more upward movement. If anything, I would have preferred that it kind of coned upward once it got out of the blades section, so that it kind of surrounded our chopper upon escaping the force fields. But you know, like I said, for the purposes of the tutorial, I just wanted you to be able to see our chopper in camera view. So I'm just going to go back into the physics tab for the cone. We're going to scroll down to the render tab and uncheck show emitter. And then I'm going to select our volume. I know plenty of you prefer using Eevee for your renders. I did have a separate section for this, but for now we're just going to use cycles. Now, because we are in cycles and I don't want my potato PC to cry, I'm going to set the max samples in the viewport to 8. We're going to turn on denoise. And for the render, I'm just going to set it to 32 so I can do some simple sample renders. So we're going to jump into the shader editor here. For our volume box, I'm just going to click new. So as you can see, I've hidden the Bell 206 so we can get a good look at just the volume on its own. We've deleted the principled BSDF, zoomed out and gave ourselves some room here. So first thing we're going to do is Shift A and add a texture coordinate. And next we want to add a vector math node. Which I will Shift D to duplicate 2 more times. This one we will set to subtract. This one will remain add, and this one will be set to multiply. Connect vector to vector from our subtract to multiply. We'll connect object to the subtract and generate it to the add vectors. Next we will set 0.4, 0.4, and 0.8. Then Shift A and add a noise texture. Go ahead and connect vector to vector here. For the scale, we're going to knock it down from 5 to 2. We'll also bump up our detail to 8. Then Shift A, and we're going to add a mixed color node. Change it from mixed to linear light, and then connect vector to A and color to B. Move this over a little bit. Next, we will add a vector math node and set this to length. Shift A. Now we want a math node, which we will duplicate. The first one we will set to less than, and the second we will set to multiply. Connect these all up, value to value, value to value. Finally, we can add our principled volume. Just make a little bit more room here. Connect our value to density. Then we're going to select our less than and Control J to create a frame for it. Just go into this little tab here, select node, and for the label, we're going to name this scale. And we will select our multiply, Control J to create a frame. Just move these over a little bit. And we will name this one density. Finally, I'm just going to move this over and connect our volume to volume. We're going to add a color ramp. You just move it above these two nodes and connect our noise texture to the factor and the color to the color of our principled BSDF. So I'll click this little button here to go from 0 to 1. We'll start with the white and we'll give it a lighter brown color. Bring it down a little bit so we find something that we like. Back to 0 for the black color, which we will give it a darker brown color. So for the position of our dark brown color, I'm going to set it to 0.43. And the position of the lighter brown color, I'm going to set it to 0.53. Feel free to tweak these two as you see fit. Then we'll go ahead and take a look at our density here, and I'm going to bump this up to 4. And our scale will be set to 25. Let's take a look at this in cycles. As we can see, the noise is a bit heavy. So feel free to bump that down if you like, or just, again, tweak it as you see fit. Perspective view, just look around. Make my potato PC cry a little bit. So if we take a look at our samples over here, we can see that they're going up at a fairly decent rate. But if we go into our render tab and scroll down to volumes, we can bring down the max steps to 8. I wouldn't recommend going any lower than that unless you want cube-shaped volume, and we're good to go. And that should help speed up your render times as well. So that's the main reason why I did this. So just keep that in mind. I don't want to wait a million years for volume to render. So we'll go ahead and save our progress. And if you're the type that is concerned about organization, you can select all of your nodes, Control G to join them into a group. All you have is this, which I will call version 2. I had an idea on version 1 because the plan was to test out multiple volume types, so that's just one. So let's go ahead and focus on another volume setup, and you can choose which one you like best. So first thing we're going to do is Shift A, add a noise texture. If you have Node Wrangler enabled, then Control T, which gives us our mapping and texture coordinate nodes. Then we're going to add a color ramp, Shift D to duplicate, add a math node, our principled volume. Then we'll connect the color to both factors of our color ramps, and then our top color ramp will go into color for the principled volume. We'll connect the color of our second color ramp into the multiply value, and then connect volume to volume. So this is a much simpler setup. For the top color ramp, we'll set the black position to 0.4. We go to the white color, set multiply from 0.5 to 20, noise scale from 5 to 1. We'll set detail from 2 to 8. I'm going to jump into our version 2 node setup. Select it, hit tab. I'm going to highlight the color, Control C, tab out, hover over the white color, and Control V to paste it on there. We'll go back into the tab, Control C our dark brown color, and we will hover over the black color and Control V to paste. Now that we have our color set, we'll take a look at this in cycles, see how it looks. Overall, I think that the dust has good spacing. And we'll just repeat the same process for this node setup. Select everything, Control G, and create a group. Go into this tab over here. We will name this version 1. So we have a simpler one, and then we have a little more complex version as well. So just feel free to use whichever one you think is best, or whatever volume setup that you already have. You can just bounce back and forth and just go with whatever works for you. So in my case, I'm going to stick with version 2. It's a little more dense, but I like it. This is the render engine that I use exclusively, and occasionally I'll use Eevee, but I have a small section for viewing this in Eevee as well, though I'm not well versed in volumetric lighting on the Eevee side, but with cycles, it's literally just setting it up and it just works. So it is what it is, and I appreciate your continued likes and subscriptions to my channel, and we can go ahead and keep it going. So we're just going to start off from frame 250, and I'm going to try my best to tweak our material a little bit to fit more of an Eevee style render. So we're just going to go into the world settings. I'm going to bump this up to 5 just to get a little better lighting on the volume itself. Then we're going to select volume box. Go into object, and with version 2 selected, take a look at our noise texture first. I'm going to bump this up to, let's say, about 50, but feel free to tweak that a little more if you like. And one thing I found was going to our lighter brown color, bumping that up to something bright. Going to our darker brown color, bumping that up as well. And that seems okay. I feel like I could get better results, though, as I said, I'm not too well seasoned in setting up lighting for volume and Eevee. I did try to select the ground plane, Shift A to add a brightness and contrast, which it didn't seem to work, so got rid of that. Another thing you could do is, by default, your volume is normally set to 16 pixels. Mine was set to 8. And so I decided to bump it down to 2 pixels and test render or test play that out. As you can see, it does spread okay, but in my opinion, and maybe it does it in cycles as well, it just kind of stops and doesn't appear to move very much. So this is kind of why I tend to avoid Eevee. Now, we could also blame it on the fact that I do have that wind force field pointing downward, so it's suppressing some of the upward motion. But either way, these are the changes that I would make towards at least getting a better view of your volume. I also tried to go into the material settings and just to test and see, because we have that 4D highlighted, I did try to move that around a little bit. It just didn't really look that good. So again, if you're better with Eevee and have a proper understanding of how to set this up, then you already know what to do, but I just didn't want to leave you guys out of the loop. And so now we can move on. Please ignore the fact that I don't have the color ramp applied. Editing this was hell and mistakes were made. We're just going to jump back to the first frame here, scroll down with our volume selected. We will go into the physics tab for our smoke sim, scroll down to the cache, and change the type from replay to all and select bake. Now, while this is baking, which I highly recommend, it should save you some time, and then you can just tweak your material settings however you see fit. And if you don't like the results, you can always change a few things and then bake it again. But this will also save you processing time because it's already baked into your scene, and you can go ahead and worry about other things. So we can now focus on getting our chopper blades to spin. So first thing we'll do, Shift C to center our cursor, Shift A, and add an empty cone. I'm going to rotate it 180 degrees. Then we're going to grab it on the Z axis. I'm going to bring it up to the second notch. In this case, that is 20 meters. Save our progress. Jump into solid mode. And now we can give it a custom name, which in this case, I'm going to set it as B_empty. which could mean blades, bell, whatever. Then we'll select our helicopter blades, and as you can see, by default it's set to WXYZ quaternions, and we don't want that. That's going to throw everything off. So XYZ Euler, Control A, and apply its rotation. In the Z rotation, we're going to right click and add driver. Then we'll jump down and change it from the shader to our drivers. Click this here, go to drivers. We'll just bring this up a little bit so we have some room to see what we're doing. And the first thing we're going to do is change this from bar to something that's makes more sense for our scene. So in this case, I'm going to do bell 206 underscore throttle. Then we scroll down and select our object, which will be the B underscore empty. Then we will set this to Y location. Scroll down a bit, add input variable, and we will set this to current frame. Instead of prop, we're going to change this to scene. And our scene will be the scene. For the path, you can just right click on current frame, copy data path, Control V to paste it in. It will be frame underscore current. And now for our expression, it will be current frame times bell 206 underscore throttle. So with all of that looking good, we can now select our empty, and if we just grab it on the y-axis, we can see that the blades do spin back and forth depending on its position on the y-axis. So now we're ready to animate. Since it's already flying, we're going to just give it kind of a set spin speed. So depending on how many meters you move the empty forward will determine how fast our blades spin. So I'm just going to move it up 2 notches for now. We'll take a look here. I think that looks pretty good. So just for test render purposes, I'm going to hide the cube, go to the render tab and scroll down to check motion blur, and we'll go ahead and check that out. Feel free to play around with this setting a little bit. I kind of bounced around from setting it to between 0.5 and 2, which I know that's very extreme numbers, but ultimately I settled on keeping it at 0.5. So it really just depends on what you're trying to achieve. And I found that you get better results with setting the motion blur versus using vector blur. You kind of lose some of the details that you're going for in terms of lighting. So stick with motion blur and just kind of go from there. It really just depends on the look that you're trying to achieve. So to each their own, and set it up as you see fit. Now we can't forget about the rudder, so I'll go ahead and show you that process as well. And for the separating and editing part, I wanted to speed through that because it's pretty straightforward. If your rudder happens to be already separated, then that's great. Skip ahead. If not, I just wanted to include this part of me going into edit mode and loop selecting certain parts. It wasn't joined together as one piece, so I couldn't just push L and it selected the entire rudder. Instead, I actually had to loop select certain sections and then P to separate all of it. And once that was done, we can then move on to animating our rudder through drivers. So the first thing I'm going to do is select the rudder object, set origin to geometry, and we'll just do a quick test spin on the y-axis. Next, we will right click on that same Y rotation axis and add driver. Now that it's been added, I'll pull this up and go to the driver section. Click this and click on drivers. We're just going to do a similar setup where we will name the variable, which will in this case be Bell 206 underscore rudder. Go to object, select the B underscore empty, change the type to Y location. Add input variable, set it to current frame. For our prop, we will select scene and select the scene. Our path is the frame underscore current, or you can copy data path from frame 1 to get the same thing. Then we'll scroll up, and for the expression, it will be current frame times Bell 206 underscore rudder. Flips a little bit there, so we'll just give that a quick test. And there we have it. So I'll go back to camera mode and just press play. We can see it spinning. Looks really good. And now we are ready to move on to the next phase. Next, I'm going to go ahead and add a material for our plane. Select the plane, go back into the material shader, Control T to add the node wrangler, move this back a little bit, track down the texture I want to use. Good to go there. And because this particular material has additional textures, I went ahead and added those as well. So I added 2 more image textures and a bump node. Be sure to connect your vectors up to the mapping node. So let's take a look at what we have here. Pretty basic texture setup, and it seems like the strength is way too high, so I'm just going to bring this down to 0.5. That seems okay. You can't really tell, but it's there, so. All of those set. I'm just going to take a look at it in cycles to be sure my strength isn't still too high. And overall, it seems all right for the render. So we're just going to take a look at the camera view again. We'll click play. And yeah, that seems all right. Now, obviously, keeping a lot of the scene details low allows it to play the animation at a decent speed. So that's just something to keep in mind until you're actually working on your final render. And I'm just going to jump into the physics tab for that cone. For the viewport display, I'm going to go ahead and uncheck show emitter so that all we're seeing are the particles. So as far as the rendering portion goes, I decided to break this scene up into 4 pieces. We'll get rid of the render layers node, Shift A, and from the output, we'll add a viewer node. And we'll go ahead and add in our image sequences. So we'll start with the background, the ground plane, from the color we will add in alpha over, connect the background to the top and the ground plane to the bottom. Going to select our alpha over and shift duplicate, just move it over a little bit. We will then add our helicopter, bring that under the alpha over, connect the helicopter to the bottom and our alpha over to the top. Duplicate again, connect the alpha over to the top, and add our volume. Followed by a denoise node. We'll connect the image to image and then denoise to the bottom of our alpha over. Move these over just a bit. Shift duplicate alpha over. In this case, I wanted to add a bokeh blur, mainly because I was having outline issues, which we will take a look at here in a moment. We'll connect the previous alpha over to the image of our bokeh. Then image to image and image to image. Finally, connect the last alpha over up to both our composite and our viewer node. And for the blur, we can see that's a bit too much, so I'm just going to knock that down to 0.1. We will bump up the end frame to 500, and we will take a look at 401. Fit it to our scene. And we're good to go. Now, if we go to the last frame, I'll show you why I'm adding the bokeh. So let's say I were to zoom in a little bit. If we were to duplicate this bokeh and bring it in between the noise and the alpha over, when we bump up, we can see that once it's done compositing, there's an outline. That's what I was trying to avoid. So it actually took me a few tries to figure out what was going on. So we don't want that. So this is why we have the bokeh on the back end, and we're mixing it with the output from the alpha over of the previous image sequences. So with that all set up, our render is good to go. We can go into our output, scroll down to output, and render as you see fit. And with that, we are finally done setting up our dust wave. I hope that you found this tutorial helpful. I know it was extensive, but totally worth it. And best of luck on using it on any of your future projects. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And as always, thanks for watching.